Hey everybody, welcome to the video. So we're breaking down Week 19, the Divisional Round of the playoffs for the 4-game slate this weekend over on Draftkings. And if you find this video helpful in any way possible, please leave a like. And if you're new to the channel, hit that subscribe button. It really helps me out, and I really do appreciate it. And while you're at it, you might as well hit that notification bell as well, so you don't miss out whenever I post new content. YouTube tells me around 50% of the people who watch these videos have not yet subscribed. So if you're a frequent visitor to the channel, or if you're just new like what you see, consider that subscribe button because it really helps the channel grow, and that's obviously going to help me out as well. And if you want to follow me over on social media, handles in the bottom left-hand corner of your screen. And if you help support the channel over on Patreon, link is down below for that. I cover multiple sports. I build spreadsheets for them all. You get into the Discord chat, cheat sheet, notes, projections, and all that fun stuff. But I think that's it for the shameless plug. So without further ado, let's dive into today's video. And as always, we'll start with the quarterback position. And up top, we have Patrick Mahomes at $8,000. The Chiefs are coming off their first-round bye, and they get a pretty good matchup versus a pretty beatable Browns secondary, which got torched last week versus Big Ben, where he had over 500 passing yards. Now, something to keep in mind, this team is getting kind of back to full health. They are getting a lot of players back from COVID. Most notably, they're getting corners Denzel Ward and Kevin Johnson back, which are major upgrades for that secondary, especially Denzel Ward. When he plays, I know he has a tough time staying on the field, but he is one of the better corners in football. I believe I saw a tweet about an hour ago from PFF that he's the only corner the past 3 seasons to allow a less than 40% completion percentage against, so it's definitely a big upgrade for that defense. But even when he does plays, it's pretty easy to pick on the other parts of that defense. I don't have any concerns there, and Vegas doesn't either. They have a team total of 33.25, which is by far the highest in the entire slate, and this is definitely the best game to go for fantasy purposes. We have a 56.5 point over-under. Both these defenses are pretty beatable. I know the Chiefs defense is certainly a bit better than the Browns defense, but I mean, both offenses can put up a lot of points, so I'm really excited for this game, and as you can tell, I'm going to be really excited for this game rooting for my Browns. I do know it's going to be a very, very tough game for them to win, but hey, crazier things have happened, so I am looking forward to it. But this should be a really good game for fantasy, and I really like Patrick Mahomes. My plan this week is to spend up at quarterback, whether it's going to be Mahomes, Allen, or Lamar Jackson. I'm not a big fan of any of the cheap quarterbacks, and I don't really think we have to spend on a quarterback either because we have some really nice cheap running backs, wide receivers we can use. Obviously, cheap defenses and tight end. I'm kind of planning on spending it for Kelsey, but a little bit ahead of myself there. But Patrick Mahomes, I do like him quite a bit. They should be able to put up a lot of points. Would not be surprised if they hit 40 in this game, and this is definitely a beatable matchup. They're 25th DVA versus the pass, and the Browns are worse versus the pass than they are versus the run, and they're ranked 25th versus quarterbacks, allowing about 260 passing yards per game and nearly 2 passing touchdowns. And I don't really need to tell you guys that Mahomes is good at football, but the numbers speak for themselves. Over 300 yards passing per game, over 2.5 passing touchdowns, doesn't typically turn the ball over too much, over 8 yards per attempt, and throwing the ball nearly 40 times per game. He's got great weapons to get the ball into: Travis Kelsey, Tyreek Hill, some decent secondary options as well. So you've got the money for Mahomes. I definitely think he's the best way to go at quarterback, which it's kind of obvious. He's the most expensive guy for a reason, but my plan is, as of right now, is spending all the way up for Patrick Mahomes. And if you can't get all the way to Mahomes, though, I do think Josh Allen and Lamar Jackson are decent options, and I just realized I have these guys out of order. It's going to bother me, but we'll talk about Lamar Jackson first. $7,600. So he was not having the greatest game in the world early on in that game last week versus the Tennessee Titans, but he had that 50-yard rushing touchdown, which kind of boosted him to having a pretty solid game. Had around 30 Draftkings points. Still didn't get over 200 yards passing, but what he can do on the ground always gives him a really nice floor and ceiling combination because he had over 100 rushing yards in that game. This is a pretty good matchup versus Buffalo. I would say their defense is a bit better than the Tennessee Titans, but this season versus quarterbacks, they have not been that great. They actually rank 19th versus the position. It's not awful. It's not like 25th, 30th, but they're still below average, and they're 12th DVA versus the pass, but Lamar Jackson, don't really care about how teams are versus the pass. The Bills are kind of mid-pack versus the run, but his combination of being able to run the ball and still being able to throw the ball a little bit. I mean, if you throw in 200 yards passing with a couple of touchdowns, he did not have a passing touchdown last week, still at around 30 Draftkings points. So if you would have added a couple of passing touchdowns in there, you'd have had a really solid game. So if we can get close to 100 yards rushing on the ground here, get into the end zone, and get a couple of passing touchdowns around 200 passing yards, I definitely think he can be a very fine option. I just really like that matchup for Mahomes in that game overall. But if you had to drop down to Lamar Jackson, I don't mind that whatsoever. And then Josh Allen at $7,400. He gets a pretty tough matchup here versus the Baltimore Ravens. Definitely not a matchup I'm too excited about. They're top 10 versus quarterbacks this season, in addition to being 10th DVA versus the pass. But like Lamar Jackson, he does offer some rushing upside. Now, he doesn't run the ball quite like Lamar Jackson. Like, Allen's not the kind of guy that's going to get around 100 yards rushing. Like, on the season, Lamar's at around 70 yards rushing per game. Meanwhile, Josh Allen's below 30. But he did have a rushing touchdown last week, and he's actually averaging a half a rushing touchdown per game this season. So he does give you a nice floor and ceiling combination as well. And he's having a fantastic season, especially through the air. He's definitely improved a ton in that category this season. I think that can a lot be thanks to Stephon Diggs, but they're just a perfect pairing. But about 285 passing yards per game this season, throwing the ball quite a bit, and your 70% completion percentage, which is the big upgrade for Josh Allen this season. He used to be one of the worst quarterbacks in that category. Now he's near the top of the chart. So definitely very impressive from Josh Allen this season. But I think these are the three quarterbacks I'm looking at because I don't really want to play Drew Brees, Baker Mayfield, Jared Goff, or whoever starts that game, and Tom Brady. They're just not too exciting for me on this slate. So I want one of the big three quarterbacks because I feel like their ceilings are just a lot higher than the other quarterbacks on this slate. And I think that's it for the QB, so we'll move on to the running back position. And as you're going to notice, I do not have Alvin Kamara on here or Aaron Jones, or the two spend-up running backs on the slate, because I personally don't think we have to go there. I'd rather spend up at the wide receiver, quarterback, and tight end position on this slate. If you have the money for Alvin Kamara, I think that's totally fine. I don't love the matchup versus the Buccaneers. They are tough versus running backs, although they can kind of get beat up through the air, which is Alvin Kamara's bread and butter. But if you got the money for him, that's great, but I really don't think they're necessities on this slate because these running backs that are in the mid-range, I feel like they can be just as good on a point per dollar basis. Like we're getting Nick Chubb about $1,300 cheaper than Alvin Kamara. I know he doesn't have that receiving upside, although he did get that near 50 yards receiving touchdown last week, but I don't really think we have to go all the way up to Kamara, those guys on this slate. But Nick Chubb, $6,600. So according to Vegas, this should not be a great game for Nick Chubb because they're 10-point dogs here, which Chubb is not the receiving back on this team. He's a capable receiver, and they actually used him last week in the passing game a little bit, which is nice. And if they do that again, I think Nick Chubb will be fine either way. But the key for the Browns to beat the Chiefs here is just to run the ball down their throats. You got to keep Patrick Mahomes on the sidelines, and they can run the ball. I mean, they're one of the best teams in the league that can run the ball this season. They have two great backs in Nick Chubb and Kareem Hunt. Nick Chubb being one of the best running backs in football. I mean, that guy is absolutely incredible. And really, just the way to beat the Chiefs is to keep the ball out of Patrick Mahomes' hands as long as possible. So I personally think the Browns' game plan here is just going to be running the ball, killing that clock, and just having Patrick Mahomes on the sideline. And the thing about the Chiefs' defense, they're not that good versus the run. They're pretty good versus the pass, but versus the run, they're one of the worst teams in football. They rank 31st DVA versus the run this season, 25th versus running backs, allowing over 100 rushing yards per game. Also close to 6 catches and over 50 receiving yards per game as well. So I like Kareem Hunt and Nick Chubb here quite a bit. I feel like Nick Chubb is more of the tournament play, just in case the Browns do trail a lot in this game. They are 10-point dogs. It could be more of a Kareem Hunt game since he's the pass catching back. And I guess we'll just start talking about Kareem Hunt here instead of going straight down the list because we're already talking about the Browns backfield. But both these guys, they're definitely viable. But I think Kareem Hunt is way too cheap. I know he doesn't get quite the volume that Nick Chubb does, but he's going to be involved in the passing game. And he gets work on the goal line as well. Like a lot of times the Browns will use Nick Chubb to get down there, then they'll bring in Kareem Hunt since he's got the fresh legs and he'll get the touchdowns. I think both guys can have some pretty solid games, but at only $4,800 for the guy that has pass catching ability. Also, he's in a revenge spot here versus Kansas City. Don't forget, he left the team quite a few years ago with the off the field incident. So bit of a revenge spot there, and I like both guys quite a bit, but that price tag for Kareem Hunt is going to be really hard to pass up in a really good matchup, and you get the nice narrative as well. So we talked about Nick Chubb and Kareem Hunt, so let's drop down here to Cam Akers at $5,700, who I personally think is the best running back play on the entire slate. I feel like he's way too cheap. I said that in the last week video versus the Seattle Seahawks, and it wasn't even that great of a matchup versus Seattle, but the guy still had around 200 total yards. He got into the end zone at around 30 DraftKings points. Was an absolute smash play at $5,100, and his price only came up $600. And this is actually a really good matchup versus Green Bay. And similar to the Browns, the key to beating the Green Bay Packers here is going to be keeping Aaron Rodgers off the field as long as possible. So I assume the Rams are going to be trying to run the ball quite a bit in this game. I know they are 6.5-point dogs and only have a team total of 19.5, but this is a really good matchup on the ground for Cam Akers. And we saw later part in this season how good he's been down this stretch. And the Packers right now, they're allowing the 5th most points per game to the running back position. They're 18th DVA versus the run, close to 100 rushing yards per game and close to a rushing touchdown. Also allowing him 5.5 catches per game. And Cam Akers, we're probably looking at 20 to 30 touches from him. And at $5,700, he's going to be really hard to pass up. I assume he's going to be a core play for me whenever I post that video later on in the week. Big fan of Cam Akers in this game. Then Clyde Edwards-Helaire at $5,500. So he's a 10-point favorite at home. They have the highest implied team total on the slate. I like his chances of getting into the end zone. He's also involved in the passing game. It's a pretty good matchup versus Cleveland. We saw James Conner. He put up around 15 some points, which was not great, but he was around the $5,000 range, similar to Clyde Edwards-Helaire. And I think Clyde Edwards-Helaire is a much more exciting option than James Conner. So I know the Browns are a bit better versus the run, but it's definitely not like anything too stiff. They're allowing the 8th fewest points per game, but they are 19th DVA versus the run and allowing nearly rushing touchdown per game. So I like chances of getting into the end zone with this one at $5,500. Should catch a couple balls as well. And that's why I'm saying I don't think we have to go all the way up to Alvin Kamara, because these backs, Nick Chubb, Cam Akers, Clyde Edwards-Helaire, Kareem Hunt, they're just all so cheap for the roles they have in their offenses. I feel like they can just be just as good on a point per dollar basis. Then Devin Singletary here at $4,500. I imagine he's going to be pretty popular. It's not the best matchup in the world versus Baltimore. They shut down Derrick Henry last week. But there's not going to be any Zach Moss competing with carries here, and they pretty much split carries. So I assume Devin Singletary is just going to be the lead dog here, and if that's the case, it's going to be pretty hard to pass him up at only $4,500 for a guy that can catch the football, and he's on a pretty good team as well. So I like his chances of finding the end zone. Yeah, I think that's it for the running backs, so we'll move on to the wide receiver position. And up top, we have Tyreek Hill at $8,000. So it's actually not that hard to do a Chiefs stack. Like, Mahomes is $8,000, Tyreek Hill is $8,000, Travis Kelce is right below $8,000. I realize that is expensive, but it's not like these guys are on $9,000. So if you have enough value, or you can find enough value, you can actually make it work. But if you are debating between Tyreek Hill and Travis Kelce, personally, I'm going to go with Travis Kelce this week just because Denzel Ward, Kevin Johnson, they're back for the Browns. I know this is still a good matchup. Wide receivers have been killing them all season long. They're going to move around Tyreek Hill. He's not going to be stuck on Denzel Ward the entire game. But they don't have anybody to be able to guard Travis Kelce. The Browns linebackers have struggled all season. The safeties, I mean, it's just not been that great. They haven't been able to cover tight ends this season. We just saw Eric Ebron have a pretty solid game. He got close to 20 Draftkings points last week. So I'm going to side with Travis Kelce over Tyreek Hill with both their fine plays. I'm just saying Tyreek Hill is probably more of the tournament guy, while Travis Kelce is more of the cash game guy, but both are totally viable. I'm just saying if you have to pick between the two. But obviously Tyreek Hill, he's probably got the highest ceiling on the entire slate, or at least close to it. Remember, he had that game around 60 Draftkings points, which is absolutely insane. But yeah, I definitely want parts of the Chiefs offense here. Highest supplied team total on the slate at 56.5 point over-under game. He's got a touchdown per game this season, close to 9 targets, close to 90 receiving yards, a 35% market share of the team's air yards, 23% target share. Yeah, he's a very strong play if you have the money for him. It's just I will prefer Travis Kelce over Tyreek Hill. But the Browns have struggled versus wide receivers all season long. We saw that last week versus the Steelers. Again, game flow worked perfectly for them, and they kind of went more towards a softer coverage defense, which did help that a little bit. But Juju, Claypool, Deontay Johnson, all those guys had really strong games. I think they all had the fire emojis on DraftKings last week. They're 25th DVA versus the pass, and they're 24th versus wide receivers. So yeah, if you got the money for Hill, I think he's a fine play. It's just I'm not sure if you're going to be able to afford all three of the big Chiefs offensive players this week. I'd love to, though. But Stephon Diggs, $7,300. He's a lot, I shouldn't say a lot cheaper than Tyreek Hill, but he's definitely more affordable. And he's been having a fantastic season this year. Now, he was getting shut out last week. Well, not shut out, but he had a catch, I believe, at halftime against the Indianapolis Colts, and it was looking like a pretty big bust, but he ended up turning it up in the second half, got into the end zone. I think it was like a 40-yard catch, ended up having a very strong day. In addition to Josh Allen, have a strong day as well. Those guys have been going off, seems like every single week this season, but Diggs, he has yet to have a game below double-digit points this year. He's just been so darn consistent and so darn good all year long, close to 100 receiving yards per game, over 10 targets, 30% target share, 68% weight opportunity share, similar market share of the team's air yards to Tyreek Hill. So yeah, if you got the money for Diggs, I like it. If you can't get all the Tyreek Hill, I think Stephon Diggs is a fine secondary option. I think you can play him in cash games or tournaments. It's just the matchup is definitely a lot tougher here versus the Baltimore Ravens. You should see a lot of Marcus Peters here, who's, he's a pretty darn good corner, and they're actually allowing the 10th fewest points per game to the position, in addition to being 10th DVA versus the pass. So I wouldn't say I love the matchup, but as good as Stephon Diggs has been this season, I'd say for the most part he is pretty matchup proof. But actually, my favorite wide receiver we were going to talk about is Michael Thomas at $6,700. I still feel like he is way too cheap. The price came up a little bit last week. He was at $6,300 or $6,400 depending on the slate you play, but that's too cheap for a guy that has such a big role in his offense. And he got into the end zone early last week, got into the slime zone if you're watching it on Nickelodeon. He only had 18.3 points, which isn't going to it's not going to wow you, but it's pretty solid. I would not be surprised if he can get us 20 plus points here. It's a pretty good matchup as a wide receiver versus Tampa Bay. And he's got a pretty good history versus Tampa Bay as well. But in the games he's played this year, about 8 targets per game, a 28% target share, a 43% market share of the team's air yards. I know he's got an old and dusty quarterback throwing the football in Drew Brees, and it sounds mean to say I really like Drew Brees, but he is certainly not the quarterback he used to be. Now, the Buccaneers, they are 5th DVA versus the pass, but they've really struggled versus wide receivers down the stretch. They're now ranked 21st versus the position, allowing close to 40 DraftKings points per game at $6,700. When you factor in the price point, the matchup, and everything, I really like Michael Thomas a lot. Now, I would say he's my favorite wide receiver to use on this slate. Yeah, I think Tyreek Hill will probably score more points, as will Stephon Diggs, but at $6,700, I like his chances of being one of the better point per dollar options wide receivers on the slate. And then some more mid-range options here. We have Jarvis Landry at $5,600. He had that nice long touchdown versus Pittsburgh to make it 14-0. And if you are stacking the Chiefs and assume they get a lead, the Browns playing from behind, they're going to throw the ball quite a bit, which they're a team that loves to run the football, but if they have to throw, they will throw. And Jarvis Landry, he's been pretty consistent the past month or so now. If you're looking at his recent games, 20 points, 16, 19, 11, 20, 31. So he's the obvious wide receiver one in this offense. Should get anywhere from, I'd say, 8 to 10 targets in this game. It's not the greatest matchup in the world versus the Kansas City Chiefs. They have been tough on wide receivers this season, allowing the second fewest points per game despite being 16th DVA versus the pass. But if you are assuming the Browns are going to be trailing this game as they are 10-point dogs and what should be a high-scoring game, he could see some softer coverage. And I like his chances of being able to pay off value at $5,600. Could be one of the better point per dollar options on the slate of this position. Then Cole Beasley at $4,900. I was tempted to use John Brown here because, look, we all like John Brown last week. I think he was like 60-70% in cash games. Got absolutely nothing. Now, obviously, Cole Beasley actually playing in that game, I thought he was going to sit out. Actually playing in that game, it did hurt his chances a little bit of paying off value, but he was still way too cheap for his role in the offense. He still got targets. He did absolutely nothing. I know Cole Beasley didn't exactly go off last week, but he definitely was more productive than John Brown. And at $4,900, assuming he's a little bit healthier than he was last week, I think that's just too cheap now. I don't like the matchup here. He's going to see a lot of Marlon Humphrey in the slot. We know he's a very good very good cornerback. But, I mean, still, if the defense is going to focus their attention on Stephon Diggs, Cole Beasley could just see just less attention here. And he's been a great receiver this season, around 1,000 yards. He even got an all-pro vote, which I don't really agree with. But $4,900, Josh Allen throwing the football, it's pretty hard to pass up. So if you need a value wide receiver, definitely like Cole Beasley a lot there, despite the tougher matchup versus the Baltimore Ravens. So now we'll move on to the tight end position. And up top, it's the obvious, but it's Travis Kelce at $7,800. And personally, I'd say he's my favorite play in the entire slate. Quarterback, running back, wide receiver, tight end. I think he's my favorite play. I just don't know who the Browns are going to use to guard Travis Kelce. I assume he's going to have a very strong game here. Would not be surprised if he gets 100 plus yards, 2+ touchdowns. I mean, this is a smash spot for Travis Kelce. And his numbers on the season are absolutely insane. They're pretty much wide receiver numbers and better than most wide receivers. Close to 100 yards per game, 7 catches, 9.5 targets, nearly a touchdown per game at 25% target share, 25% market share of the team's air yards. I mean, the guy's just had a phenomenal season, which is what he does pretty much every single year. Also, a very good matchup as the tight end versus the Browns. In addition to being 25th DVA versus the pass, they're allowing the 4th most points per game to the tight end position. Now they're playing the best tight end in football. He's got a massive tight end versus linebacker advantage matchup here this week per PFF. So yeah, if you got the money for Kelce, well, even if you, I think he should be your priority. I'm going to start my builds more likely than not with Travis Kelce and Patrick Mahomes this week, as I just think that's a really, really good spot for fantasy points. And then if you can't get all the way to Travis Kelce, or if you want to play 2 tight end lineups, which I'm not totally against, because if you want to spend up at some other positions, sometimes you have to go double tight end and use a cheaper tight end. And I actually did that on the Sunday slate. I believe I used Mark Andrews and Eric Ebron in the same lineup. Ended up working out pretty well. But speaking of Mark Andrews, $5,000, he actually has a pretty good matchup here versus Buffalo. They've struggled versus tight ends all season long. They're actually only one spot better than the Cleveland Browns. Are allowing the 5th most points per game to the position. I know he didn't exactly have a great game versus Tennessee, but Mark Andrews is I'd say the more consistent option in this lineup. I know Marquise Brown had a pretty strong game, but it's a very good matchup versus the Tennessee Titans. Bit of a tougher spot here for him versus the Bills. They could use Tre'Davious White on him, and I mean, they'll move around the lineup, but I still think Mark Andrews is probably the better option to go here, and he's a little bit cheaper at $5,000. But his numbers on the season have been pretty solid. Just when you compare them to Travis Kelce, it's definitely going to look pretty pedestrian. But for a tight end, for most tight ends, that is pretty darn good. 50 receiving yards per game, close to 6.5 targets, half a receiving touchdown per game, with 25% target share, and close to a 30% market share of the team's air yards. So Mark Andrews, I actually don't mind going like Travis Kelce and Mark Andrews in the same lineup. I don't know if you'll have the money for it, but if you do, I don't mind that at all. And then Austin Hooper at $3,800. So similar to Jarvis Landry, if you assume the Browns are going to be trailing, or even if they're not trailing, Austin Hooper is a key cog in that lineup. He had a pretty strong game on Sunday night, got into the end zone, and was targeted often as well, as he had a team-high 11 targets in that game. He's kind of Baker Mayfield's safety valve, and you can definitely count on Austin Hooper. The guy's got soft hands for the most part, so And it's a good matchup versus the Kansas City Chiefs. All three of these teams that we've talked about, their defenses really struggle versus tight ends. We got the 29th, 28th, and 26th ranked defenses versus tight ends here. So yeah, Austin Hooper's in a pretty good spot. He's only $3,300. If you want to do like a little double stack in the same game of Travis Kelce and Austin Hooper, I think that's totally fine. And then as for the defenses, they're not that fun to talk about, but we do have to roster our defense, unfortunately. But we got the Packers here. They're at home. They're favorites by 6.5 points here. They only have a 19.5 implied team total against them, which is the lowest on the entire slate. If you got the money for them, great. Although I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to spend up that much money for a defense on this slate. But again, it's only Wednesday, so things can obviously change. Chiefs defense against the Browns. Just personally, I don't want to play the Chiefs defense because I'm rooting for my Browns, but they are 10-point favorites at home, so I totally understand that. The Saints, $3,300 going up against Tom Brady, although I don't feel great about that, but they are the home favorites for $3,300, and they did absolutely smash the Buccaneers last time they played. I know the circumstances were different, but still, they're a solid defense at $3,300. Then the Bills defense at $2,900. Don't love rostering defenses versus Lamar Jackson, but again, they're only $2,900. If he makes a mistake or two and just doesn't absolutely go nuclear on the road here in Buffalo, I like their chances of maybe being a decent defense. I don't expect them to get 20 points, but if they get 5, you're not really too concerned about that unless the Saints or the Chiefs are like 30% owned and they get a defensive touchdown. Then you're going to start to worry, but again, you can't really predict the defensive touchdown and defenses, so yeah, I think that's going to be it for the video, guys. So I hope it was helpful, and if it was, make sure you leave a like, and if you're new to the channel, hit that subscribe button. It really helps me out, and I really do appreciate it. You can follow me over on social media. Those are the bottom left-hand corner of your screen if you want to help support the channel over on Patreon. Link is down below for that, for all the sports that I covered. I think that's about it. I'm looking forward to these 4 games. It's actually a really, really good slate. Looking forward to a lot of good games here. And yeah, this should be it. I'll stop rambling and I'll see you guys in the next video. We'll have the lineup building video probably Thursday, Friday, in addition to the core plays video as well.